Okay, great.
You guys approved the purchase of the system a couple of months ago, and we've been implementing it.
All right, so now we will officially open the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. There's no one left. Okay, good evening, Mayor and members of the council. We're here to kick off the public hearing tonight for your 2015-2016 annual budget. This is a process that has been going on for about 6 months, and we're here to make our presentation. I'm going to cover the highlights of the budget message, and Drew Corbett, the city's finance director, will talk about the details of the budget. You do have a public hearing tonight for members of the public to give you feedback. We want to hear a Q&A certainly from the council itself. And the theory then is you will direct us at the end of this process to bring back a budget to you for adoption on June 16th, either as proposed to you tonight or as amended. The theme of the budget this year is it's time to invest. And the council may or may not recall, this is my 4th budget I'm presenting to the council. And originally we had the theme of financial stabilization. 2 years ago we had the theme of rounding the corner. We are now stabilized, and we are now looking at trying to find a way to invest in this community in a way that the council and the staff can support. The investment right now is to continue to fund the core services that the communities come to expect, as well as supporting the council goals. And to do so is going to really require us to staff up. And the budget this year reflects the local economic conditions. As you know, we have had 3 years of very strong economy, and we only find ourselves in a better condition than 3 years ago. And to Mr. Soffer's point earlier, it's hard for me to imagine anything busting immediately. If there is any kind of turn, we will see the symptoms, we will see the decline, and we will adjust accordingly. But to do so, and in order to really invest properly for the city so that we come out in the end in a stronger financial position, it's going to require using reserves. And this is unprecedented somewhat for this city council to do. I want to walk you through very quickly my logic that we're trying to apply. I'm really sorry. I can't see you guys, and I can't see the screen, so I'm going back and forth. I really apologize about this. We're showing you here 5 years of data, 2 years from the past and 3 years in the future projection to show you what we're attempting to do here. What you will see is in the budget year 2013-14, 2 years ago, we closed the year out with nearly $5 million in an operating surplus. In the current year, we anticipate closing this year with a little over $2 million of an operating surplus, really for a total of nearly $7 million. Next year's budget, we are asking the council to take some of that $7 million from the prior 2 years and provide it in the 15-16 budget, $1.6 million potentially for the 16-17 budget, and another $1 million in the 17-18 budget. And at the end of 17-18, we will find ourselves financially whole again, not necessarily requiring on reserves. I think importantly to note, though, is even at the end of 18, we will still find ourselves $3.1 million better going through this process and the 3 years of expenditures. The big issue for us has always been this notion of capacity, and this was mentioned earlier by the mayor tonight about sort of my constant theme of capacity building and how do we get to a point so that we can deliver projects that the community and the council have expected. On April 7th, the City Council approved almost 9 new positions in Public Works, Community Development, and Human Resources. We're here before you tonight asking for what I refer to as the second tranche of employees, and that's 6 more in Public Works, 4 more in Community Development, 1 in Information Technology, and a partial position in the library. The assumptions we have built in for the budget with regards to personnel, the budget request is authorizing the staffing, but we are not anticipating filling the positions on July 1st. So what we've done is we have reduced the amount of funding for these new positions in the first year, recognizing and acknowledging that we just won't have them probably until more like November. So they're not fully budgeted. And again, the delay between authorization and actually going out and hiring and filling the position and getting the people running full speed. The 10-year forecast, you will also note, builds in the presumption that in the 2018-19 year, we will reduce the headcount by 5, and in the 2019-2020 year, we will reduce the headcount by 3, assuming everything else is as strong as it is. Obviously, if conditions change, projects don't happen, council decides to slow down on its capital investments, we would, of course, reduce the headcount to accommodate that. We do continue to have future challenges. We do continue to have certain vulnerabilities that we're going to highlight for you tonight. Certainly revenues are always a vulnerability for any organization. Sales tax we've become much less dependent on over the years as our sales tax, as our car dealers left us over 10 years ago. The utility users tax is a funding source that has remained relatively static despite the fact that utility costs are going up. Drew will explain to you why the number is not increasing accordingly. And the whole conversation around excess ERAF, which I know is sort of techno-hypo jargon in the world of budgeting, but it's something I think this council understands, and given that, Fran, I'll explain to you excess ERAF later, I promise. The excess ERAF issue is something we brought to your attention in years past. It's a significant funding source for the general fund. Each year we have it, it's always threatened to be reduced, and so we have always budgeted a 50% allocation of ERAF, even though each year we've continued to receive 100%. But you will see that we are, again, this year budgeting it at 50%. We talked earlier tonight about our competitiveness in hiring and retaining staff. And the issue here is, as we staff up, we're going to have to remember that we're going to have to remain vital and successful in this market. And that has been a struggle for us in the past. And I think the council has recognized that and started to make those adjustments. Employee integration. This is the issue around if the council indeed says yes to the new head count and we move forward, and let's pretend by January 1, 2016, we have all these new employees on board, just for the sake of argument. Integrating that staffing into this organization is not going to be easy. It's not going to be without its hiccups and pitfalls, and we're going to have to make sure we're hiring the right people for the right positions who are qualified to do the work. This is not about bringing warm bodies into the organization. We need more than that. I think we also have to acknowledge and recognize the economic and development cycle we're in. I think Michael Yarney pointed this out to you earlier today. We're in a robust economy right now, and I want to believe, because I'm optimistic, that this will continue for a while. The good news is you have a finance director who keeps my feet on the ground and reminds us constantly the cycle may soften eventually, and what do we do when that happens? And so we just want to always be mindful of that and our ability to then adjust as the market, as the cycle may adjust as well. And finally, and I think Councilmember Keith brought this up earlier tonight, I'm not sure, good for you for recognizing this, is the fund degradation. We have a couple of dozen funds that we run the city on, and a handful of these funds were set up as sort of endowments. The idea that the principal would remain untouched and the interest off the principal would be what we would use to provide the service. Well, you all know our interest right now is down around quarter of a percent, half a percent? Half a percent. It's just not keeping up with the demand for these funds, and so we're seeing a certain fund degradation or decline in the principal on these funds. And I think the Bedwell Bayfront Maintenance Fund is a very, very good example of that, and we probably have 5-ish years left of that fund if nothing else changes, if interest rates don't change. And what will occur then is Bedwell Bayfront Park will become a park that's maintained by the general fund, just the way all the other parks are. I want to remind the council how we got where we are today. The council on January 26 adopted its goals, and in that goal setting there was a very lengthy conversation about capacity building, and the council agreed in concept to move forward with the idea of enhancing our staffing. May 19th, the City Council approved its CIP, which brought to you several more projects requiring a certain level of staffing as well. May 22nd, last week, 2 weeks ago, we did release the budget to the public and to you. On May 26th, we held a budget workshop out in Bellhaven, in part as part of the Menlo Connect the Connect Menlo process, also in part with a process we kicked off last year by having a staff release of the budget, trying to explain it in great detail to those who really want to hear about it prior to a public hearing, so people could come prepared with questions or comments. Like, maybe that worked, maybe it didn't. And finally, you're here tonight with the public hearing, and really the staff now wants to hear your feedback and understand what do we need to bring back to you on June 16th that you'll be comfortable adopting. At that point, I'm going to turn it over to Drew, who's going to walk you through some of the high-level details of the actual budget itself and the numbers.
All right, thank you and good evening. So I'm going to walk through briefly some of the numbers. So the first chart you see before you is the citywide proposed budget at $78.1 million for 15-16. Nearly two-thirds of that is the general fund at $49.3 million. I'll discuss that more next slide. Other major funding for next year would go to the water fund at about $9 million, general capital improvement at $3.6, and the transportation impact fee at about $4 million. The remaining $12 million of the citywide budget is split amongst the 30 other funds in the city. So that two-thirds of the citywide budget is the general fund, as I mentioned, and that is split up amongst a number of operating departments. The police department takes up a third of the general fund, and another 17% goes to public works. So between police and public works, that's two-thirds of our general fund expenditures, with the remainder going towards community services, community development, the library, and city administration. Excuse me. Just looking at briefly the comparison between the 14-15 adopted budget and the 15-16 adopted budget, highlighting some of the changes for public works and for community development. Those are up significantly over last year, and that's predominantly due to the staffing that Alex has talked about during his portion of the presentation. Otherwise, for the other departments, police, administration, library, and community services, the increases are the result of essentially two things. The first being the built-in assumptions regarding personnel cost increases. So we built in assumptions about salary increases, and then there are the assumptions about the medical cost increases as well as pension increases. The other change that we did this year, and I'll highlight it on the administration. If you look, administration is down $700,000. That's because we've pulled IT out of the general fund, and we've created an internal service fund, and we've allocated the cost of IT to the operating departments. So the police, for instance, you see is up $1 million this year. The $600,000 of that is a reallocation of IT costs into the police budget. So that's a direct offset from administration. And so overall, the general fund is up $2.8 million from last year's adopted budget, or about 6%. On the revenue side, 48.1 is the proposed revenue number for next year. A third of that is property tax. Another 17% of that is charges for service, and those would predominantly be community service charges as well as charges for planning services and engineering as well. Other major revenue sources in the general fund are permitting for building, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax. So with respect to the revenues, I think it was important to talk about some of the assumptions that are made, because the revenues are really based on assumptions. And as Alex mentioned, one of the large assumptions for property tax is that we'll get a 50% share of excess ERAF in 15-16 and 16-17 before it drops off in 17-18. Again, that's an assumption only. It's very difficult to project that. We're pretty regularly told by the county that to be conservative with our projection. It's always an uncertain source of revenue, so we've continued to do that. However, we seem to get hit every year with the good news of getting a full share. So that's a challenge. Otherwise, we're projecting extremely strong growth in property tax. Secured tax looks very good, and we've included the in-process development into our forecasts going forward. Sales tax, on the other hand, I think you'll recall last year when we produced the budget, we had just learned that a major top 25 generator had left the city. That's been incorporated into the projection, as has the assumption that another top 25 generator will be on its way out by the end of the calendar year. And going forward, we have very modest growth projected. We do not see sales tax as a growth source going forward. On the other hand, the hotel tax, the transient occupancy tax, we're doing very well this current year, strong current year revenues with great occupancy and room rates. We have growth projected in the forecast. We've got the Residence Inn incorporated as we have the Menlo Gateway Hotel starting in 2018. Utility users tax, we have very minimal growth projected. We receive utility user tax from 6 different sources. 3 of them are projected to grow modestly, while another 3 being telecom, wireless telecom, wired telecom, and cable. We're actually expecting, based on industry trends, for them to slowly decline. So between the 3 growth and the 3 declines, we expect very modest growth going forward for UUT. And then finally, on development-related revenue, the service charges for community development and public works and the permitting for prominently building are at very high and what are considered to be unsustainable levels. We do expect them to continue, those revenues to arc up over the next couple of years before starting to return to a more sustainable level. So as Alex mentioned in his slides, we project that in fiscal year 2018-19 that we're going to drop 5 head count, right? And then in 1920 it'll be 3 head count to get to a back, and that's correlated to these development revenues. We think as the activity declines, as revenues decline, the service demand will decline, and through attrition we'll be able to drop some of the head count that we're adding for development related purposes. So those 2 move in tandem. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Alex.
Certainly. Sorry. So again, just to remind you what you're doing here tonight, you need to open a public hearing, take public comment, close the public hearing, and then importantly, questions and comments from the City Council. We want to make sure you understand what you are potentially directing us to do tonight. The department heads, as you know, are sitting behind me, and they will answer any technical questions you might have about their budgets. And then give us directions for any kinds of changes you might want to see in the budget, if any at all, and we will return to you on the 16th. And again, our goal is really to invest now so that at the end of this 3-year process, we will find ourselves in a financially stronger position, projects under completion, if not actually completed, and again, in a better, looking forward to a better financial outlook. So that's what we got for you tonight. Thanks.
Okay, do we have any cards for public comment? Seeing none,
I'll move to close the public hearing.
do I have a second?
Second.
We all vote?
The motion passes unanimously.
Do we have any questions or discussion on the budget? All right. Councilmember Otake.
I don't see lights just popping on right here, I guess. So I guess I'll start off with my questions here. So, certainly the key aspect to this budget is the increase in head count, primarily in both community development, which is planning, and in our public works department. And first of all, I wanted to address the concerns that have been raised in public comment earlier this evening. We have tried for 2 years, if I recall correctly, 2 years to use either temporary contract planners or even what we call provisional staff, provisional employees, and unfortunately, what has happened is they all get, it's a revolving door, because as they get up to speed, they get basically leave for full-time jobs elsewhere. That's correct?
That's
right?
generally been our experience, yes.
Yeah, and so in effect, our productivity and our capacity has been increase has been negligible because you add those folks, they finally get up to speed, and then they're out the door, right?
Correct.
And then you have to retrain somebody new, even if they're a contract employee.
Correct.
Okay, so and I know we had this discussion, but I wanted to reiterate that because this is the primary driver to, I think, the budget being in effect a not balanced position for the next 2 years, and it's something that I have been proud that I've had balanced budgets that we've experienced the last several years, and so for me, to actually vote in favor of basically this deficit is something that I've been grappling with for months, and I appreciate the fact that we have walked through together this decision-making to have it happen. I also appreciate the fact that you're factoring in that it recognizing that there may be just natural attrition issues so that by 2018 that starts coming down. The question that I'm trying to understand was that many of these positions are reimbursed by fees. But yet in the budget it looks like we're incurring a lot of the expense, but then a lot of it doesn't get recouped until we get TOT from the Gateway Hotel in 2018 and the increased property tax associated with developments, presuming it takes 3 years to actually go through construction and get them operational. Do the fees, is there just a shortage, or why do the fees not necessarily cover the direct cost of those employees?
Well, the fees for those particular positions are not going to cover 100% of the cost. I think it's roughly, I think Linda would help me out with, about 2/3 is what we... A little higher. So let's say 70%. But there's also a timing issue. I think a portion of this is we've collected already, and now it's time to spend in that instance. If you look at the development-related revenues for permitting and for the planning side, they are up, and we've got them elevated for the next several years to go along with these increased expenditures. But it's not a one-for-one relationship, so they're not going to fully cover those costs.
So that's also an interesting point. So really, the surplus that we had does include development fees that were collected already, but we don't, because we don't have the capacity on hand, in effect, so that we've recognized the revenues ahead of the expenses with the headcount increase. All right, so there is that correlation between the surplus that we've just experienced and the additional expense.
There is, but it's not neat and it's not clean. I mean, part of it is, and we've made this point, is that we haven't, we haven't been able to spend over the past several years what we've been budgeted. Part of the reason for the surplus is not a function of revenues being so much greater than we expected. A lot of it's been we have not spent what we've planned to spend, and there's been a cost to that in terms of not getting things done. What I would say about this budget is we are putting more resources towards getting these services provided so that we can get to that end game of the TOT that we're expecting and the increased assessed valuations. So we're accelerating the spending faster than we are projecting the revenues in the short term, so we can get to the long term quicker. If I were sitting here saying to you, well, we've got a $1 million a year structural deficit, meaning from now until the end of time, I'm projecting we're going to spend $1 million more than we're going to bring in. That would be a terrible budget to bring forward, right? And I wouldn't bring a budget forward like that. We're intentionally pushing the spending over the next couple of years to get to where we need to be to set us on a better path going forward. I think, could we ratchet that back? If we could, if we did, though, I think that would push out where we want to get to with the TOT and with the property tax, because those are material changes to our revenue baseline 3 years down the road. So I think
And in fact, there's an argument that if we don't do that, and if we only use the existing capacity, the projects get delayed potentially to the point where we may miss the business cycle, essentially, completely, if we don't actually. And a lot of, for example, the public works employees, I know, are tied to the CIP, the capital improvement plans and projects. So I assume similarly many of them are funded by other funds than the general fund. But again, I'm assuming it's similar, that it's not 100%, so there's a general fund impact for that discrepancy as well, that is part of this as well.
Well, to the extent employees are going into that are being funded by, for instance, the general fund CIP, we're still putting a set transfer from the general fund to the general fund CIP. So we haven't changed the amount that we're funding.
Right. That's about
that
$2.5 million a year, right? Or something like that.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit higher than that, but yeah, that's close.
Okay.
And then, yes, and then I know that some funds are going into, some of the headcounts going into the water fund, into the transportation impact fee fund. So all those are non-general fund funding sources that have funding available to cover the cost of those positions.
Okay. Another question on this year's budget. You show interest income, interest and rent income being 1.1 million. Previous years it's been 780,000. Is that based on interest rate?
No,
because I don't think interest rates have moved that much.
We lump two things into that category, and one is the lease revenue that we receive, and the reason for the increase is the change in the terms of the lease agreement of the Cornerstone building.
Got it.
It's not a material increase in our expectations for interest earnings.
Okay. And then another question is, you have built into the forecast PERS rate increases, correct? That
Yes, I have.
are coming down the pike over the next couple of years. So there's also that timing that is increasing the expenses as well. But then you see that sort of capping and reversing it, well, not necessarily reversing itself, but as PEPRA rates start.
Yeah. Yes. So we work.
Help me finish that sentence, I guess.
Yeah. So we work with a consulting actuary to develop long-term rates, because what we get from CalPERS sort of assumes everyone is going to stay on the same plan, which we know is not the case. Everyone that comes in the door comes in under a lower pension tier. And so we work with a consulting actuary, and what he's seeing is over the next several years, rates are going to continue to rise slowly to address some of the changes that CalPERS has made over the last several years in its actuarial and its demographic assumptions. However, as we continue to get more and more employees into the second tier and into the third tier, those rates after maybe year 5 or so will start to slowly arc down, assuming that CalPERS continues to make its investment return. And just as a point of reference, right now, as of last payroll for our miscellaneous folks, so for everyone outside of the police department, we're now at 28% of our existing city staff is under Tier 2 or Tier 3. So we've almost hit 30%, so that's pretty significant. So that's why there's the projection those rates will go down over time.
Great. All right. Well, I appreciate that. That helps to explain my questions. I'm certainly, since I'm going to go right into comments to save time here, it's just I do support this budget. I would love to see the forecast, whatever we can do to try and get 2017 to 18 back into balance, because I'd really prefer not to be running 3 years of deficit. I do understand that the next year and a half, not all the 20 get hired, and then that next year. So I do understand the math, just the sheer math of doing that. But it would certainly, whether it's the fees that are associated with those staff, I'd like to make sure that that gap and that period is closed and as short as possible. So, thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the budget, and that was a lot of the good questions and exchange between Peter and you, Drew. Thank you. I have a few other questions that I just want to get some clarity on, and it kind of goes in the same direction. I remember going through this process a bunch of times now, and trying to make the assumption of when the market's going to make some different movement. And I don't like saying anything bad, the bad words here, because it's a goocher, but in case there is a shift in the economy and people are starting to talk more and more as if they anticipate some weakness in a few years, a year or two. Have you anticipated that in your outlook, or can you not do that based on just, you can't? I mean, it's hard to do.
So, excuse me, so I don't try to project when the next downturn can occur, but what I do is I do look at the projection itself and try to moderate it to factor in the fact that there will be some ebbs and flows. So I don't try to time it, but an example I'll give, and this is something Alex and I have gone back and forth on quite a bit during the development of the budget, is the FIA for the Menlo Gateway Hotel calls for $3.3 million in revenue, and that would be some 3 years out. And I've projected it for the purposes of the forecast at 2.2, because the 3.3 number, I think, is a number that in a good economy is a realistic number. And if the hotel were opening tomorrow, I would use that as the number we would project because of our economic condition. But there will be the year when it's nowhere near 3.3, when the economy turns. And so since we're 3 years out, I'm trying to take sort of a middle ground approach to use as an ongoing baseline. Same thing for sales tax. It's going to ebb and flow, but I try to be very modest, because if you look over time, since the last downturn and we lost the car dealers, it's been very flat. We're not even keeping up. Property tax, on the other hand, over the last 10 years, our assessed valuation has averaged 5% growth a year.
And that was in a terrible place, and people were predicting it to just fall off the shelf. It didn't come close. Right.
When when assessed, the example I gave recently in a presentation I gave was that in the worst year of the downturn, in a year when the California CPI that's used to grow AV, or in this case reduce it because the CPI was negative, there was enough activity in Menlo Park such that assessed valuation actually grew 0.25%, which was really unheard of. So that's a very steady revenue source for us, and it's really reassuring that that's a third of our general fund. So I project that one a little bit differently, because it really doesn't fluctuate as badly with the economy, whereas a transient occupancy tax and a sales tax will. So again, I don't try to predict the timing of the next downturn, but I try to moderate the projections, especially as we get further out, to recognize that there will be ups and downs.
And then were you able to map with maybe with Jim or with other folks on the major businesses in the community, and even just talk to them about their anticipated projections, so that you can understand what they foresee in a revenue projection, or even just their growth, and whether or not they see products to market, or if there are a different model for how the state perhaps starts taxing web companies and all these different pieces. I don't know if all those things came into consideration. I'm sure in a 10-year plan you kind of can't, but you want to, right? Have some kind of understanding of the timing on those.
Right, and I think, yes, I mean, Jim and I talk, pretty constantly about all things, especially as they relate to sales tax, and to the extent something's closer in, it's a lot easier to determine how we're going to incorporate it into the long-term plan. I think as we get further out, something good happens, something else offsets it, and again, because when you look at sort of the history after the dot-com bust, when we reset the revenue baseline for sales tax, other than a blip in 2008, we've been relatively flat. So.
And then on the projects, because usually the indicators are those four, right? You get sales tax, property tax, the license, the permits. Those are big ones in the FTOT, and those are going to be the health of the city based on a lot of that. licenses and permits you have coming down, but you have it coming down deliberately, as if we will choose to perhaps not approve projects, or that you think the projects will stop. I have a tough time understanding how you see projects stopping when I keep hearing and seeing the CIP stuff that we didn't do. And you look at it and think, well, there could be more.
Right. I think just we're at such an unprecedented level right now that we are thinking that, or I'm thinking that it will come down to a more sustainable level, which is still a pretty robust level of sorry. It's not like I'm bringing it down to we're not going to be approving anything. I'm just suggesting that it's at a level that I don't think long-term is sustainable. But in that case, I'm really moving the revenues with the expenditures. So if something happens and the activity stays up, the expenditures will stay up with them.
If I can, Councilmember Klein, one of the things that we consciously didn't do, but we call it out certainly in the budget letter for the 10-year forecast, is we acknowledge things like Facebook, what we now call old Facebook versus new Facebook, and yes, we start using that terminology. Old Facebook is the East Campus and the West Campus combined. New Facebook are all these things that we know things are happening, we know stuff is going to occur, but it would be presumptuous of us at this time to try to guess what that is. I mean, we know the projects are coming forward on what I call Gary 2 and Gary 3. There's also 1 or 2 hotels out there that are potential. So none of that's built into the forecast, but we acknowledge it as, hey, heads up, this is coming. And the last thing we also don't necessarily build into the 10-year forecast is what the Connect Menlo process will do for us. We know it'll do something, but again, how do we come up with a number that's reasonable and realistic? And so we just sort of call it out as, hey, we're doing great. Revenues are exceeding expenditures 3 years out and forever. Well, not forever, but for a long time. And that is exclusive of Facebook or the Connect Menlo process.
Okay, that helps a lot. And then just to bring up the point, when you talk about we'll have some reductions in FTEs down the road, how does that take shape? Is that an assumption of retirements or general attrition trends that you see?
It's sort of all the above, and the one thing that has been pent up and is ready to happen is the baby boomers will go. And in the next 5 years, we should, in fact... Oh, not you, Charisse. No, so I was looking for Gina. No. I mean, the reality is we have sort of a dual population here in the city. We have boomers that have sort of, because of the recession, didn't choose to go, who will probably in the next 5 years choose to go. And then we have just generally a younger workforce that's coming on board. So between that, the your workforce being more ambitious and more willing to go find jobs elsewhere for a variety of reasons, I think Amanda Wallace was a great example today that you saw her. She was great. She did great work for us. We couldn't keep her. We'll find ourselves going through that. And I think every time we turn a position from now on, we will stop. In fact, we've been doing this for a while. We'll stop and ask the question, do we need to refill it? Right. Should we stop, wait, evaluate, look at moving things around and see what makes sense? For the new positions, particularly in public works, we will look at the workflow and say, when do we slow down? When do we stop the work so that as engineers peel off, maybe we just don't refill them?
Okay. Yeah, and I'm always thinking back to when we did have the shift in the market, and then, I think there was a lot of, there was a great concern. A lot of people hadn't been through that in the town, quite frankly, and we made a lot of decisions year after year. We never really got ourselves out of losing money year after year throughout that, but we reduced it to the point by the end it was less than it would have been greatly. The fact is, our general fund, it's so healthy, too healthy almost. We have to create policies to use the money, right, to invest it in the right places, because it does end up, when you see that, it does have there is a great insulation that I think when people start looking at this budget and saying, well, you're going to hire these people and we're going to be put over the, we're going to be, put on our heels here with 259 FTEs, there is still the safety valve of having $20-some-odd million if things do go down, to give time to make those adjustments, and it's more, right? It was 28, but then I think it's almost up, but you had it down at 24 after some investment. I guess with that, then it becomes, how do we invest the money that has come in, but how do we also get all these projects through before what we anticipate is a shrinking of the window opportunity. And what you're saying is this is going to do it. It requires people quickly. The budget is obviously very good, and strong. It's hard to poke a hole in it. You're conservative on ERAF, conservative on long-term outlook, conservative on a number of different indicators, and still the money, it looks very good throughout the process. So as you see that, it's hard to sit here and go, well, maybe you're not being realistic. Being too conservative is just as bad as not, and so you have to be very careful and strike the balance. So I think it is very strong in terms of the budget and the outlook here. We should take a moment to count our blessings and congratulate ourselves for that. It's a success, but we have lots of implications to that, which are dealing with a lot of growth, more growth we can handle, and then finishing projects that we promised. And so I am supportive, obviously, of the budget, and I do believe that there's going to be a methodology to balance if we need it. But I think that's going to be the responsibility of leadership to take that, if it's worse than we think, and make those moves faster rather than waiting for attrition to happen on its own. And that's going to be a tough decision to make. We couldn't make it 5 years ago. Right. We never did. We went through a slow process, so I know how hard it is. So I would expect that to be another one of you don't want to say it ever as the leader, right? But it has to be one of the areas you have to consider as you go through it. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Councilmember Mueller.
Yeah, so the first question I have is, Drew, way back when the Finance Committee recommended that we take a portion of the budget and allocate it to the unfunded liability fund, is that in this budget?
So the last action the committee took, or the council took on the committee's recommendation, was to shift $3 million of last year's surplus into the pension reserve. So the pension reserve now has $4 million into it. The policy would be to take 25% of any net surplus from this year and put it into the reserve. So the action is taken as a part of the closing of the books annually.
So it wouldn't happen because we'd be at a deficit at the end of the year.
For next year, potentially, yes.
Yeah. Guys, so I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'm not going to support this budget because it's not balanced. I'm not going to support an unbalanced budget. There are, Alex, in your comments, you said, we would see indicators we would know. Well, we're starting to see indicators. Economists are telling us in the last 2 quarters the U.S. is potentially have been in recession. And I think we're all sort of sticking our head in the sand if we don't realize we're in a tremendous bubble right now. You see swings of Twitter and other stocks, well, with one quarter of net earnings are off, and there's a big giant drop. A lot of the industry here right now, technology-wise, is basically built on advertising. So we're going to see it last, but if the economy swings, we're going to get hit. So I'm not comfortable having an unbalanced budget. I know that, and I also have looked. Drew, I asked you for these numbers on FTE, and our FTE has grown since 2012 by close to 30 employees with the 2016 budget. So at the end of 2012, it was 229.75. At the end of 2016, it'll be 259 in this proposed budget. And it's over $7 million increase, which is over 20% increase in labor costs. I understand we're making an investment, or that it's called making an investment in the future, but really what we're doing is we're servicing the projects that come into town. Right? We're not in business. We're servicing the community. We're servicing the project that comes into town. And so and the other thing philosophically that I have difficulty with is that in times of robust economy, those are the times that you act appropriately. Potentially you build your reserves so that when the economy turns, then you can do your deficit spending in order to smooth it. And so I'm not comfortable in a time of a robust economy, when we know we're in a bubble, to get caught into the speculation, well, if we do just a little bit more and it lasts just a little bit longer, we'll make it. I'm not comfortable doing that. So I'm not sure where, you want feedback tonight. That's where I am on it. I'm not sure how we bridge that gap in terms of where the budget is. I think I'm going to it sounds like I'm going to be in the minority in that anyway. But that's where I am in looking at this. And I hope people take my comments with a grain of salt, because I do have concern when I see not just 1 year but multiple years of deficit. I don't, maybe I'm overly conservative, but I don't see this robust economy lasting 5 more years. I just can't. If it does, I think it's going to be one hell of a pop when it happens. So those are my comments.
Councilmember Key?
Thank you for your budget presentation at this hour. A lot of my questions have been answered, and my concerns. I had the pension question I was going to ask about, and the PERS rate, and I'd asked about what percentage of staff were in tiers 2 and 3, and I just heard Drew say 28% now. I think we do need to invest, though, and I think I do want to see a lot of these projects. I know we've got a backlog of 80 projects, and so I would like to see us catch up on some of this. I mean, I share concerns that the bubble could burst and we could have issues. And I did have questions for you, Alex, about, I noted in your budget you talk about attrition. But I think, one thing I'll just ask you, if you, Rich was getting to it too, that if this does burst and we don't have the projects coming in the door, are you going to fire people?
We will lay people off, yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm just going to be blunt. It's 12/11. And we looked at the housing. After the RDA was eliminated, we laid off 4 people from the housing department. We still don't have a housing department at this point. So I know, it's not something it's not something you want to do, but I think you need to just say that is something that you will utilize if you need to.
I mean, that's always at the city manager's disposal, is to look at the staffing and ask the question, do we have too much, and then eliminating accordingly.
But through the mayor, doesn't that require a vote of the city council? It's not entirely your discretion to lay off people. I mean, you can ask Gina, but I'm pretty sure, like when the housing department went, that required a vote of the council.
Well, we can ask Mr. McClure.
Yeah, generally, layoffs, just for staff purposes, can be done by the city manager. He can hire or fire as long as it's within the budget. He may bring it to the council to get policy direction. So in the case of the housing department, it's really eliminating an entire department, assigned functions. It required, basically a reorganization that, while it may not have required council approval, it was appropriate because it was a major policy change, and therefore, I mean, it made sense to bring it to the council.
Yeah, so I'll just continue a little bit. So I think that, we do have a lot of projects on the horizon right now, and now we have the Willow Road overpass to look forward to. There are all sorts of things that can happen and change, and I think that as these projects are here now, I do want to see a lot of them move forward, and I know that that's what we had talked about with our goals, council goal setting. We put all these goals in here, and we've put in the climate action plan, and you hired people for that, and we've put in all sorts of things. So I would like to see these projects move forward, and I'd like to see us catch up at some point, or try to. I don't know that we ever will catch up, but at least attempt to catch up a little bit more. But with the, strong knowledge that if something happens and suddenly these projects go away and the economy tanks and we're not going to see all sorts of things in the M2, or things just go away, right? That you will be utilizing more than just attrition, because that's what it's going to take, because we're authorizing you to hire many more people at this point because of the projections that you've made and that we have talked about at these many meetings. And that's why we've authorized your ability to hire people. So should that change, I would expect that it wouldn't just be attrition, but there would be layoffs as well. And I hope that that's not the case. I hope that we see some really great progress in Menlo Park. I think that this, it's time to invest. Okay, so it's time to get some of these projects moving forward. So I am going to support the budget. I agree with what Peter started out with, that we've been on council together the whole time. We've always had balanced budgets. So it is a little counter intuitive to say, oh, I'm going to, agree to this. But I see the rationale behind it. If things change when we are here in the same position next year, I might change my rationale for the next budget. But as of right now, I am supporting this. And thank you, Drew, for all your excellent presentation as well. Thanks, Alex.
Okay. I kind of have a different take, but I think I'll probably get to similar places. You told us that you told me earlier that you assumed Bohannon's Hotel is going to bring in $2.2 million instead of $3.5. Across the board, I see you being very, very conservative, and we talked about this earlier today. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be very, very, very conservative, because at the end of the day, it's setting expectations, and it's always nice to have a happy surprise as opposed to an oops. However, to Vice Mayor Klein's point, there is a point where you're losing transparency by underestimating as much as you lose people's faith by overestimating. And as we look back, we had a balanced budget, but we're $3 million over. We have a balanced budget, but we're $4 million over. And you told me earlier that you actually expect that expenditures will, at the end of the year, will be up $2.6 million. And I have trouble reconciling that. I realize the accounting procedures, and you just won an award. You do a great job, but you have to understand I'm frustrated when there's the expectation that actually in reality we're going to be up $2.6 million, but then you have a budget that says we're going to be overspending 1.2. And I have a frustration with that because I agree with Councilmember Mueller. I am really loath to have an unbalanced budget, but on the other hand, I consider opportunity cost in not spending and investing. As we've seen in things that we've been dealing with tonight, things that don't get done get more expensive, and things that don't get done walk away to other cities. And we want to make sure that we get Bohannon's Hotel built, so we get the TOT. I think something was said about Greenheart, that it's something like $300,000 a month in tax and fees that can come into our schools and our city to help us. We don't want to lose that those funds unnecessarily. And I know it's a struggle that we always want to spend as much as we can to get as much as we can back without overspending unnecessarily. And that's why I struggle with the fact that we always seem to have excess. And from my lips to God's ears, yes, please give us the full ERAF again. But I look at things like, we still have about $1 million left over from last year that we didn't assign to the bucket for unfunded pension liabilities. That would balance. Where did that go? Why can't we financially put that in? I mean, I'm struggling with, are we really looking at overspending, or are we being super, super conservative? I just want to know what the reality is that I'm voting on. And I know it's a rhetorical question to a degree, but I just want to hear what you have to say.
So I would say, I would disagree respectfully that I'm overly conservative. I think we could, because I understand that leaving money on the table is not a good thing. So I think we could all argue about the excess ERAF, and we could very easily and reasonably say, you know what, we should go ahead and budget a full share. And if we don't get it, we lose out on that.
I use that as an example, not necessarily for reality, but
right. But I mean, on the expenditure side, I've baked in quite a healthy vacancy factor. I've assumed a lot of positions are going to be vacant all the way through into November. So there's some pressure there. I think the thing that I've talked about is over the past couple years, the predominance of our surplus has been a function of us not spending what we've been budgeted to spend, and we've had the for lack of better terms at this time of day, the excuse of we haven't been able to staff up. We don't have the administrative infrastructure to staff up. And what I talked to you about today was you know, if you approve this $49.3 million, well, the pressure shifts back to us to get this stuff done, because there's really no more excuse to not move forward, right? And so, do I think there's do I think there's a chance that we're going to get a full share of excess ERF? Yes, absolutely. Do I think that we're going to be closer to spending the $49.3 million next year if that's what's appropriated? Yes, we should, or shame on us, right? Because we've told you our need. If you approve the budget as is, you've given us what we've asked for. We're staff, you know, we have the potential to staff up. We've factored in the fact that we're not going to be fully staffed on July 1st. It's time to produce.
Okay. And so if this is an investment, what's our ROI? I mean, if we're putting our money in to get these things done, to get the whether it's Greenheart or Bohannon or what have you up, you see what I'm saying?
I mean, Mayor, I think the return on investment for the city is in 3 years we'll find ourselves financially stabilized with a project such as Bohannon, but there are many other projects to consider. And the sooner it comes online, and this is where your $300,000 figure came from, the sooner it comes online, that's each month we delay, it's a loss of $300,000 in revenues to the city. So if we don't have the staffing to move Bohannon along, and this is just one example, I want to be really clear, but this replicates itself across the board, every month we delay, we're losing revenue. So the sooner we can sort of curry him along, get him under construction, get him up and operational, that's your return on investment, financial stability.
And
that's
so
my opinion.
And that's the opportunity cost.
Correct.
Is not getting them done and losing the $300,000.
Exactly. Correct.
Okay.
But times 30 or times 40, because that's the number of projects we have out there waiting for attention.
Okay. I had a meeting this morning with Gina, and our staffing numbers have been this way, a little bit up, back down again through the years. And this is a big leap. And I have difficulty when people ask, how do you justify that? In some cases I can, because if it's someone that's directly working on something like Bohannon or whatever, their fees are paying for that. And so that person's pretty much covered. And I can see how that's going through. But when we talk about extra library people, extra admin, extra whatever, I have to be honest, I struggle. And thank you very much for the document that you gave us that outlines why we're hiring each person. You've heard my diatribe in our last council meeting about getting in the one IT guy so we can get a lot of the things, permits online so that we free up people. I see the need, I understand the need, I understand your position. I'm just uncomfortable. I want to make sure, and this is why I had a meeting with Gina, that if we need the extra people to get this through, that when the bubble bursts, that when the people stop coming through, that when Bohannon gets finished, that we can seamlessly lay them off. And Gina swears hand on heart that she has laid off, 400 people in San Jose before, and she knows how to do it. And I worry a little bit that we could have an entirely different council when that comes around. And I'm heartened to hear that you would not have to go to the council, that you could decide. And I hope you would have the fortitude to do that.
So, I mean, so yes, without missing a beat, I want to be clear on that. And you know, it's important to recognize that one of the challenges this organization has had is there have been sort of new opportunities that presented themselves, and we've said, yes, we will do that for you. And all it meant was, okay, we'll talk about a rail separation, a grade separation for the train, for the Caltrain, But that just means we're not doing something else. That's all that means. And that's why that list grows from 60 to 70 to 80 backlogged, because we're taking on new projects. They're important projects. I'm not suggesting the council is at all out of line by saying we should look at the overpass at 101 in Willow. No doubt about that. But it just means we're not going to do something else. And I think Mrs. Nash, I can't remember her first name, her whole point was you can't take that on and have something else suffer. And clearly she has an interest in a particular project, but that's why the dog park suffers, or the sidewalks suffer, or the third, fourth, or fifth project suffer. And that's just what we just keep doing. And all I'm suggesting is we've been a lean organization for a long time. And if you go back to the 2010 year, we were up at 245 employees. We dropped down to the high 220s. We ramped back up again. Organizations do that. They cycle. It's not unusual, as long as we're doing it mindfully in a way that the council is comfortable and understands it. And I hear some discomfort and some comfort. So I think it's just a matter of how can we make you all comfortable with this? What assurances do you need about if the bubble bursts? And I hate using that term. I know we still have the fresh burst in our ears from 2008, 2009. But the other side of the equation is, what if the bubble doesn't burst? Well, I mean, what if it doesn't burst in the next 3 years? Wouldn't it be great to position ourselves so that when the darn thing does eventually burst, we are much more solid? And that's what we're trying to get to.
I have a feeling this conversation will continue over the next couple of weeks. I would like to feel more comfortable. Right now, I'm not comfortable with the budget, and I'm not comfortable with the number of people, although I intellectually realize what you're saying. I wish there was a way of making it better. Even down to, I wish, I realize that you don't like the contract. I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable that we can, I hate to say get rid of because that sounds terrible, lay off, deal with attrition. But I'd like to go through it and really understand exactly why we need each of these people, because it just seems like a lot. The last time we hired people, I thought that we were good, and now we've come back with more people. Are you going to come back to us in 6 months and say now? I mean, you see what I'm saying?
I do.
It makes me uncomfortable.
And I understand all that. And again, I think one thing I recognized early on here was, that this tsunami of work coming our way, and acknowledged, wow, we need to do something. And I think we went through various processes and conversations with the council and authority from the council to do certain things. And I think what we learned is, particularly in this economy, when the economy busts, we'll probably be able to hire temps all to our heart's content. We can't find those people right now. So it's really a question of, what does the council hope to achieve in the next 2 to 5 years, and how can we position ourselves to help you do that? I think we've been, if nothing else, we've been consistent on the capacity conversation. And to build capacity in this economy is not about contract employees anymore. It's not about provisional employees anymore. It's not about temporary employees anymore. We have to own our staff. Or the trade-off is, that's why we gave you the list of employees on the dais tonight, we can start cutting headcount, and we will just sacrifice those projects. Not sacrifice, they will be slowed again. And we're okay with that, if that's what the council's will is. All we were sort of suggesting is, when you guys set your goals this year, you said, Alex, show us what we need to get all of this work done, and that's what we're coming back and showing you.
Just to play devil's advocate, have we tried things like, and we talked about this earlier, but have we tried things like you can have a longer contract, like a 5 or 7 year contract, and we'll pay you significantly more, things along those lines?
Contract, you meaning for an employee?
Yeah.
Or for
an employee.
We don't have employees on contract. Well,
yet.
Except me,
you do, but
right.
But I'm saying, could we do that as a way of making sure that we bring them on for a project, and when the project ends, we don't have to go through the pain. There's more of a painless way of.
I think what we're seeing, though, is we have a series of projects that are just stacking up one behind the next behind the next. And so that employee, if we do it project by project by project, we're doing a lot of oversight and management on those folks. And what you're going to probably trade off for will be more management time and less performance time. And on the project side, not necessarily on the development side, but on the project side, I think what Jesse's trying to show is hey, once the dog park is done, we don't work project by project. We have layers. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and each employee is working on a project at the beginning, the middle, and the end. So something will taper up and taper back down again. I think we're showing a taper up. We stay tapered up for 5 years. And that's about getting that backlog completed. The trade-off is, I think when we came back to you guys with the CIP 2 weeks ago, the conversation was about, what don't you want to do then? I mean, tell us what's not important or what's not a high priority. And I think the hard thing about this community, frankly, is everything's a high priority. Everything's very important to get done. And I'm just tired of playing lip service to the conversation of, okay, we'll get it done. And then we have 10 more projects on the list that we're not going to do. Somewhere along the line, that cycle has to stop. This is one way of stopping the cycle, is staffing up to get through the work. The other way of stopping the cycle is, let's not do the projects.
Okay. Peter?
I just I have one follow-up question, just because as I was looking at this, so you're estimating for this estimated actuals for 2014-2015 fiscal year, which closes at the end of this month, a net surplus of about $2 million. What if you increase the transfer out from 3.2 million and put that 2 million on top of it and make it 5.2, so we show a balanced budget for this year, but in effect pre-fund the transfers out for the next 2 years and reduce them by 1 million each year. So in effect, the next 2 years the transfers are lower, but you're still putting those money. Isn't the transfer out kind of discretionary? But you want to make sure the funds are in there. But in effect, you're going to this point about, hey, some of the surplus was really with the intent of covering some of the expenses that haven't been made yet. Isn't that a way of potentially doing that, so that way, it's still going to show a deficit, but instead of a significantly over 1 million, 1.1 million, 1.6 million, it actually softens that impact a little bit, and we show at least a little more consistency. And then you use next year, depending on where ERAF is, you do kind of the similar aspect, because you've got that discretionary ability to do that. That way we don't get into the situation where we show this large deficit, but then at the end of the year we're like, oh, actually it turned out to be sort of a surplus. You don't even have to answer that tonight. I'm just throwing that out as a possible idea to...
It gets you to the same point. That's correct. If we were to say, let's assume we're going to get the 2.1 net that we're expecting, let's bump that to, let's bump the transfer up by 2 million and then cut the next 2 years transfer.
Right.
You get to the same point, and you're going to show a much smaller deficit. So,
just an idea. Sorry. So, yeah, but it's a thought.
But why didn't you do that? If that's the case, why didn't you do that?
Well, in my mind, it's the same. You're getting to the exact same point. There's no net dollar impact to the city for doing that. So it's just showing a zero balance this year and less of a deficit for next year.
But we've already gotten the money in this year.
Well, we're not going to know until we close the books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you guys want to do that, fine. It just seems to me you created the budget a certain way, and now we're trying to play games to make it look a different way. And I just don't think, there's no reason to do that, guys. Number one, we're going to get called on it, and number two, the budget was done a certain way. If we start trying to play games to make it look differently than what it was, I think it's a bad road to go down.
I think what Peter's getting to, and what I was wondering about, is making sure that maybe you didn't think about doing that, I'm making sure that it's transparent and clear and honest to the point of really being honest on where the money is. And as I said, you don't have to answer. I know you don't agree, but there isn't honest on underplaying as much as there's honest on overplaying. And that's, I think, and there are ways of...
Just let me make the point, because I don't want it to come across that what I'm suggesting is just, changing things around here. I look at this account much like in a company you would look at dividends, right? You plan for a certain level, but ultimately it's a discretionary amount. And if you're having a good year, you can do a special dividend. And if you're having a tight year, you can reduce the dividend. I mean, that particular line item is more of a discretionary number. Now, I know what you're trying to do is you're trying to show a, sort of a fairly constant $3 million a year. That's why that's where the model was. That would be like, we're going to put dividends $3 million each year. But if we had a surplus in one year, why not up the amount so that you, in effect, pre-funded the next couple of years? So that's
But the only reason to do that would be to try to move away from the model, would be to try to lessen what your deficit looked like in the other years according to what your model had been. Like, there's no other reason to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. All right, well, it looks like 3 are really comfortable and 2 are really struggling. But I'd like to talk with you guys about how we can make it better, how
So
it just makes me, is this going to affect our bond rating in any way? We're all still good and balanced?
Yeah. There's nothing that would suggest it would impact our bond rating. I mean, our reserves overall are still really high.
I think the council should remember, and I think that, frankly, to Councilmember Mueller's point, I want to avoid the appearance of being overly clever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
I agree.
what Drew is really trying to point out is we closed the books June 30th. There's a hard stop and there's a hard start. July 1's it's a brand new day. Everything's new on the July 1st. And whatever's going on June 30th is now in the past year. So if we're going to carry money over, if we're going to borrow from the past year, I mean, we can get clever and creative. I think at the end of the day, we have taken in significant amounts of money over the past 2 years. So much so that we are beyond we've actually exceeded our reserve limits. You're in violation of your own reserve policy. And so all we're suggesting is, well, let's bring the reserve limits back down, take those monies, invest them in the next 2 years, or next 3 years, excuse me, so we come out at the end. We're not trying to be cute or clever with that. We're trying to be very, very, very clear that's exactly what we're doing. We're not worrying about prior years. It doesn't matter what happened in prior years. We saw the past 2 years significant revenues over expenditures. And all we want to do is take those monies, invest them, spread them over the next 3 years, so we come out at the end. If you buy my theory, if you buy our theory, you come out at the end of 3 years, we're going to be in a much better place.
I agree with you. We absolutely don't want to try and be the cute and clever. I was actually trying to move us towards transparency and actually a more honest prediction of what we're going to end up with at the end of the year. And I know that's very tricky to do. Does anyone have any further comments? Okay.
So if I can be very clear then with the council, we're bringing, because I didn't hear any changes to the budget, we're bringing this budget back to you for adoption.
We'll talk, but yeah.
No, I need to hear from the council what the council's will is and what we're bringing back.
You've definitely heard from 3 council members, I think, support for this budget.
I want to be super clear that that's what you're asking, because on June 16th it becomes the council's budget. It goes from my budget and then it becomes your budget. And I just need to make sure, as a policy board, you guys are comfortable with me bringing something back and you didn't expect me to bring something different back. That's all I'm asking. I know it's late, I'm not trying to belabor this, but I don't want to come back in 2 weeks and have you guys tell me, wait, we thought you were going to do something different.
I believe you have the majority of the council's support.
Okey-dokey.